how did you get into, so you usually become a GP or a doctor and you stay in England. Where did the refugee passion to help refugees come from?
I think it came from when I was quite young. I was living in Pakistan from age 9 to 18, and where I live in the north, we have a very big Afghan community who've come over the years since things have been happening to their country. So we've seen sort of that Bedouin community, that refugee community, and also the internally displaced community from Sawat, as a result of the drones, etc. So I was exposed to that quite young. And of course, my grandfather came to the UK as an immigrant many, many years ago. So somewhere in our lives, we're all refugees. We're seeking refuge from something. And I think it started when I was very young.
Wow. Yeah. And what was your childhood like growing up in Pakistan as a British girl? Was it difficult? Did you enjoy it? What was it like?
I think if I had not gone to Pakistan, if I had not lived for the 9 years in Pakistan and not been exposed to the cultural influences, had the teachers that I did, they were my spiritual teachers. They weren't just my teachers at school. The friendships that I made, the etiquettes that you learn, the languages that you learn, the music that you understand, the poetry, I would not have been the person that I am today. And especially, I think, Abdul Sattar Idhi, I don't know if you're familiar with this giant of a man who's no longer with us. Seeing his sort of signs of his work around Pakistan, I would not have been exposed to that. And for me, he was a very big inspiration for the work. So I would not have been the person that I am, I don't think, if I hadn't.
So growing up, you're talking about culture, and there's a lot of people misunderstand culture and religion. And a lot of the youth that I work with, they love Islam. But they think culture is evil and bad, and we only need Islam and we shouldn't have any culture. And what's the benefits of culture? Can you explain that, please?
I think culture develops over years, over centuries. The benefits can be positive and negative. I think we have to be aware of those. And I think selecting your religion versus your culture, it means there's a clash somewhere that's you internally are not comfortable with. I as a woman, as a Muslim woman, can tell you many of those things that I've experienced coming from a Pathan culture, growing up, speaking Pashto at home, having to honor certain tribal ways of life. So often the reference that you're making is, I think, that we have been brought up in a tribal way of life, whether we're Punjabi, whether we're Balochi, whether we're Pathan, Sindhi. And I think those sort of elements are not necessarily so easy to live with when you're living as an immigrant community, right? You're either second or third generation immigrant in the UK. So you've also got an adopted culture, which is the British culture. And reconciling all of those things become difficult. So in answer to your question, I think it's a complex one, and it depends on the scenario that we're talking about, really.
But you're very British in your, your accent, maybe some of your lifestyle. You said adopted culture. So which one is? When does British culture become ours, or does it never become ours, or are our roots what we should be looking at? How do you see that?
I see the British culture as, so I feel British Muslim when I'm in the UK. I think that's my identity. Sometimes I have an identity crisis, because when I'm working in Pakistan in the disasters last year, when I was there working with the floods, I feel Pakistani. When I'm in the Pathan communities, I feel like I'm Pashto speaking. When I'm in the UK, I feel like I'm a British Asian. And I think a lot of us feel that way. I think our identity is British Muslim. This is the reality. And I think our values do align with the authentic British values if we go back to those values.
I think a lot of my work as well, there's a lot of people that live their lives unaware of how much human suffering there is, and how first world problems are creating crisis for people, especially with lack of resilience. So I've had uni students who took the train to uni, and that was too traumatic for them just to take a comfortable train ride, and then they go to welfare for help. Whereas compared to what you've seen, can you give me some of the scenarios of some of the stories of these flood victims, and then we'll move on to refugees, but some of the disasters and what happens to their lives, and what's it like? What have you seen?
So I was in KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, closer to the Afghanistan area in Pakistan. And just historically, those places are very, very under-resourced. And those have been by the authorities. They have been kept that way for a reason. That we have a military base in Dia Khan. There are villages within 2 hours, 3 hours driving radius. And those areas have historically, every 5-10 years, when we have a very big flood, the mud houses will get swept away. And those people are used to this sort of lifestyle. But last year's floods were significant. They were much more intense and higher than in terms of intensity.
What do you mean by deliberately? Can you explain that?
Well, for certain countries and certain authorities and certain people to remain rich, for the military of Pakistan, the establishment to be as powerful as it is, people need to remain poor. That's the balance. That is how it works in the world globally. Okay. Sorry, I forgot your question.
Yeah, that's economics of society. So we're talking about why, and then we're talking about the actual floods, how they lose their homes.
Yeah, you asked me about cases.
Flood victims and what you've seen.
The flood victims, interestingly, they're people who are already suffering. Okay, so they don't have homes, stable homes. They don't have education. The girls are getting married very, very young.
What age?
By that, I mean 11, 12. As soon as they hit puberty, they're getting married. Then they're giving birth to children. They themselves are very malnourished. They're often having to take care of the home. They're often having to walk 2 kilometers to carry buckets of water home. So they're doing a lot of the labor work as well. And then when they fall pregnant and they're malnourished, they're giving birth to children with disabilities. I'm seeing a lot of that in Pakistan, in KPK. And in Sindh and Balochistan, we have the same issues. To an extent where the skin is so thin that they're developing ulcers, these children, by just being sat down, on the floor because they don't have anywhere else to sit. Are
the parents involved in this marriage? Are they giving their daughters away out of poverty? Is it out of culture?
Of course, it's out of poverty.
Out of poverty.
Children, sadly, in these sort of places, they are laborers for the home. There is child labor. We have to accept it. And often parents give birth because they feel they have children, because they feel they'll be supported by those children financially. They'll be able to send them out. They'll be able to do the work in the fields or any other jobs that they can do and bring in some earnings. So they're a team, but then they don't go to school. So they're in this cycle. Their votes are very cheap. They're bought by the Vadere, as we call them, the local sort of influential people. They're able to buy them for like 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees. That's every 4 years, every 5 years. So we're stuck in a rut in Pakistan, and the answer is education. Just a lot like the work that you do.
I appreciate your bravery in saying, because people don't say these things, and there's so much corruption, and it's really important to understand that these desperate people, to be uplifted, they need education and they need support, like people like you. What have you seen in this vicious cycle? Have you seen anyone get out of this vicious cycle, and how?
Well, they want to. One of the clinics I did in Dia Khan was in a very remote village called Kotlalu, and I'll never forget. We went there twice. We had a mobile clinic, so I developed mobile clinics for these areas, and we would take the medical services to them. And these places they have not had medical visits for months, really. The children, the 2 girls who were supporting me, because they're segregated communities, they're Afghan communities, and it is upon their honor, you will not have any men enter the women's area. Right. So my team were mixed, men and women. Yeah. They would not allow the men from my team to join me in the clinic for the women's area. So I had to use the services of 2 young girls, and they were 13 and 14, and they said they wanted to be doctors. By the end of the clinic, they said they wanted to be doctors. Now, the temperature was 42 degrees. I was in a clinic on top of a specific madrasa building. And the room was really, really warm. It was really hot. And we were using the truck battery to actually
keep the
power the fan, the one fan. But the women and the children were pushing themselves up onto the staircase, which was made of sort of metal. And that was moving. And they were trying to force themselves into the room to get medication because they thought medication is the answer. Yeah. Okay. I'll never forget, this young man, he was probably 10, 11, and I went downstairs to get something. While I was coming down the stairs, he was shouting my name, give me medication, and he slapped me from behind. So, you're talking about an etiquette problem, an education problem. These people are kept in barbaric circumstances to keep them illiterate, to keep them at that level of ignorance, so that they're very easily led like cattle.
Yeah.
This is what I've seen. This is the
we used to
reality.
have this old saying that the Vadere, or these landlords, so-called, they would never open a school. They'd rather give you a seed to plant a tree, and then you could have a school under the tree. It was just a saying, but literally it's like, don't empower people because they'll know their rights.
Yeah.
They'll know how to get education, and that will uplift them, and it will be a threat.
Well, the girls who, by the end of that clinic, the two girls said, I've spoken to my mum, I've spoken to my dad, and they said that I can be a doctor. But practically, how does that work when you're in a village that's an hour and a half away from the nearest school, in a van that you need to take that doesn't come anywhere near your village? You have to walk. And then you've got, sadly, the men of that community who will not allow for their women, their honor, to leave their homes. They will keep them at home. It's very difficult because the imam who was running that show in that particular village, he would say to me, you know, please set up a school, set up a school. When I'd ask him what kind of a school you want, he's like, here, the building that I have, set up a school here.
Just hold that thought, Hadia, because I want to continue with that really interesting topic. We'll continue after the break. This is Real Talk with Dr. Deen and Dr. Hadia Aslam. Don't go anywhere. See you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Real Talk with Dr. Deen and Dr. Hadia Aslam. So I wanted to ask about education, women's treatment, and I think there's a lot of denial. We're very defensive when it comes to certain treatments of women in our own communities. I'm not saying in the UK. I think women here might sometimes go the other way too far. You know, we lose the balance sometimes. But in some areas in Pakistan, I've seen with my own eyes, I've lived in that area. Why is it a taboo to talk about these subjects? And what have you seen, like, in terms of that? Like you said, women not getting access to things. I'll give you an example. In a Muslim country, there was a situation where women were in a building, a college, and there was a fire. And they weren't allowed out of the building because they didn't have their hijabs on. Yeah. So they left them in the fire because they weren't allowed out with their hijabs.
Yeah.
So imagine that scenario. It's so painful to even think about. So what is it like in terms of, like, I'm talking from an Islamic point of view, not like a ultra-feminist, neo-feminist point of view, but Islamic point of view, women's rights in Islam, and how sometimes in our societies it's completely ignored.
It's hugely refreshing to hear you as a male say this, because a lot of us women, all we need is for our men to be our allies when it comes to our rights in Islam. Pakistan, sadly, is one of those countries globally, and I'm talking about the Islamic world, where we're seeing women's rights being trampled upon in every single part of their life. Let's talk about inheritance, for example. Do we honor the inheritance law?
No, most people don't.
Let's talk about hijab. What does that mean? Does it mean a headscarf, or does it actually, is it a concept for men and women? I mean, in Islamically, the hijab, majority of scholars will say hijab is of the wearing. But the fact that for a woman to not wear the hijab doesn't ignore her rights as a sister, as a Muslim. So we don't like what the issue might be is there's a lot of prejudice against women who don't wear hijab. That's my point. You know, I think that when it comes to practicing Islam, sadly, women become the focus, and they are almost a possession. They're almost a possession where the way they choose to live their life becomes a representation of their mahram's Islam for some reason. It's a very complicated psychology, and I think it comes from the word control.
Do you think a lot of women feel that there's a lot of control in those situations?
We do.
So in terms of, like, I don't know if you've had any experience with the Taliban in Pakistan or anything, but what is this whole movement about not allowing girls to go to school? Do you have any experience of that? I
do, yeah. I was not permitted to attend school. You might not think that way when you see me, but I chose and I pushed and I fought a culture where women get married very young. And certain people in my family were heavily against my education. And the reason was, well, she's going to stand up to us. if we allow her to study. I think we have to say these things out loud. Like you said, we become defensive when these topics come up, and especially on a channel like this, it's going to be making a lot of people uncomfortable. We're not talking about feminism here. We're talking about the basic rights to learning about your own mind, to having an education, to becoming literate. Why is Pakistan in such poverty? 52% of the population of Pakistan is female. What percentage of that is literate? What percentage of that is able to support itself? Women, if you look at the inheritance laws, or the non-abiding of the inheritance laws, or the lack of education that's promoted amongst girls, women are kept that way for a reason. When you're kept in that state, you're subservient. You're able to then look after somebody else, and that is the only way of getting through life, is by serving other people. I think we really need to focus, in the detail, and we need to understand that as long as we're going to keep our daughters deprived of an education, we're not going to do very well as an Islamic ummah.
Do you have cases of like domestic violence? Is that a thing in certain cultures
Hugely.
Communities?
Yeah, it's not just the Muslim culture, I have to say that.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Of course.
It's about control. And if you can use religion or your religion's interpretation to try and control somebody's behavior, you're going to do that. If you're going to use your culture, and in the UK, in the West, television, magazines, that's what controls, sadly, the way women perceive themselves. How thin are you? And now we've got, of course, the social media. How thin are you? How good do you look? How big are your lips? Do you look like Kylie Jenner? So it happens in every culture.
So let's just talk a bit more about your work now in terms of with refugees. You've traveled the world, not for holidays, but actually for hard work, to actually save lives and really empower people. And I mean that in terms of not just, you said not just the medical, but the dental and also like psychological help.
Yeah.
So where have you traveled to and what have you seen?
So I took the route backwards that the refugees from Syria have been taking. We call it the Balkan route. And so they leave Syria, enter another country, whichever one they're able to, and then jump on the Balkan route through Serbia, Greece, Turkey, Iran. So I went to France first, set up clinics there. And when I say set up clinics, I mean you have to do it in a way where you're not so visible to the authorities, but you're able to serve a purpose to the refugees and the asylum seekers, who are not only Syrian, by the way, in Calais and in Dunkirk. So we set up medical clinics. A very, very dear friend of mine, Ola, she came and she set up the dental clinics for us. We collaborate with other people. Whoever wants to come and work, we work together. It's the grassroots movement. From there, we moved on to Greece, Lesvos, where I, with the help of many other volunteers, set up the first 24-hour medical facility, a field hospital. Bigger charities like the MSF, MDM was sending us their patients after 5 o'clock because they were not open after 5 o'clock. And Lesvos is the island where refugees, the majority of them were arriving to register themselves before they would move on to Europe, in that route that they were taking. So then I moved on to Turkey, and then in Lebanon, I worked on the borders of Syria. I set up the medical mobile facility there. I consulted for another NGO who wanted me to set up their medical facilities. I've worked in Turkey. I've been to Iraq a few times. I'm working with the universities there.
Wow.
Yeah.
But these refugees, they're just economic migrants. They're trouble for Europe. But what's your view on that? These are just poor people, but they're going to increase crime. They're only here for the money. They're going to take our jobs. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are very strong on that. So refugees are, if you want to label people, they're escaping war or disaster. And I've worked in both areas. I've worked in natural disasters and I've worked in war-torn areas. Then you're talking about the economic migrants. They're people like mine and your parents who came from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. Palestine you could call them refugees. Syria, you could call them refugees, but people also consider themselves economic migrants who come from these countries. They're not going to take your jobs. They're going to compete for your jobs, really. And if you're not able to do those jobs, they'll take them, of course. I don't think that the crime level is high because of the refugees or the asylum seekers. I think the crime level is high in the world because we're creating refugees.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a global community, we need to look at things as well.
Right. Do you think that politicians use the refugees as a scapegoat for all the corruption that they do and everything that they are busy with, whilst focusing the attention? For example, migration was the highest this year in the UK. So government's allowing people in, but yet they're doing this whole thing about, refugees are the problem. We're stopping the boats from coming in. They're allowing people in legally because they need them for the economy. Yet they tell the vote bank, we're stopping refugees. So there's like this double standard going on.
I found 2 doctors in the refugee camps in Lebanon, in Bekaa, to be able to set up the medical facility that we did there. They were living in the camps. So people who are living in the camps, or people who are seeking refuge in other countries, are not uneducated. They're not criminals. They're actually running away from a crime that's happening against them. This is such a basic concept, and my head blows when I hear people saying it in the way you've articulated it. I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Of course, these people are not criminals. They're running away from a crime that's happening against them.
Very good way to put it.
Yeah. So why are you scared of somebody who's running away from a crime to try and save their children, to try and give them a life, a future? Would you get on a dinghy boat in the middle of the night, 2 miles away from Turkey's border, on a plastic rubber dinghy boat on choppy waters?
Unimaginable.
Would you put your children on that?
Never.
Yeah. So why is a Muslim so barbaric that they would do that? It's about Islam, is it? Is it a hate against Islam? Is it a hate against the skin color? We really have to address these topics head on. It's not something we can, and the language the politicians are using, sadly, some of the politicians, their parents were economic migrants in the UK.
They're called drawbridge refugee migrants, isn't it? So they're pulling the drawbridge in now that they're here.
Right.
So no one else can come in.
Right. What's the difference between a person who you give a visa to for a job in Tesco's because your people don't want to do those jobs, or they don't want to be out picking the fruit, or your locally grown people, let's say, right? Let's use simple terminology. What's the difference between a refugee who wants to come and do that work, although they most likely highly qualified for that job, from Syria or Palestine, or Morocco, Afghanistan? What's the difference between them and somebody who you've given a legal visa to?
Nothing if they can do the job.
Right. Yeah. So why are we singling that person out who's
because
escaped?
It gets votes. You can win an election on that.
Right.
You can win an election.
So it's not about them.
The boogeyman is the refugee. Blame them and you can win an election.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it's them.
So it's not them, it's the politician who wants to be in power.
Yeah, it's the unknown people
that
you can blame, because I don't know what these people are. They could be all criminals.
They're probably better than you. They're probably better than you, the politician.
Let's continue that discussion after the break.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. See you after the break. Real Talk with Dr. Deen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back to Real Talk with Dr. Deen and Dr. Hadia. So I really want to know about how we can build empathy with people that leave their home. Nobody wants to leave the place they're born, where their families, even if it's Ethiopia or any country in the world. We might think it's nothing, but to them it's their home and their homeland. Nobody wants to do that. So people leave in desperation, get on a boat, and not a real boat, a shoddy old trawler or something, and it's overloaded with people with no resources, with these human traffickers who are basically blackmailing them, threatening to throw them off board. They're going through hell on this journey. They're giving up all their life savings to be on that boat just for a chance that maybe they'll get to Europe or the promised land. And these people are seen as the criminals. Now, I want you to tell us, what is a life of that refugee like, or those people that when they get to a certain point of maybe safety or not, but they land somewhere. What condition are they in? What have you seen? What do they have?
Brilliant question. They have a lot of hate from the public. They don't get the same rights that you and I do if they're asylum seekers in the UK. Yes, they might have their accommodation covered. They have a lot of PTSD, and I see it in clinics. GPs are seeing it in clinics. The mental health workers are seeing it in clinics. The PTSD is profound. There is no significant treatment right now available on the NHS. There is some available, but the access is limited. Funding is limited. They've lost their family, some of them. They've actually lost their friends, their network. The language is new for them. The culture is new for them. Imagine being that person. And you said, these people who've come from countries where there's disruption, what can we do for them? How about we stop stealing their resources? How about we let them live? How about we let them live in their own countries?
That's another fair trade argument, which I'm very passionate about. The fact that we drink the coffee, and the producer of coffee are the poorest people in the world.
Right.
Every resource we need, whether it's cocoa, gum arabic, everything we have in our processed foods, all of it's coming from the poorer countries, most of it that we need. Yet they're the producer, we're the buyer, we're wealthy, they're poor. And I think that's a bigger picture of how we should be giving back, or at least paying a fair price for all their work and resources.
Are there parallels you're drawing with modern slavery?
Absolutely.
Right.
What are electric cars? What are phones without cobalt and lithium? Yeah. And the conditions these people are in to pick these resources, it's slavery. Yeah. The same with the diamond trade. And the thing is, we don't see that world because we're here. We don't think about that, So,
or we don't associate it with the refugee crisis or the economic, the migrant crisis, the mass migration that's happening right now. Crowds are headed towards Libya from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other struggling countries.
And they're treated terribly in Libya.
Right.
Their money's sometimes taken off them. Even before they try to get to, let's say, Europe.
They're killed. Often they're killed.
They're locked up, they're sent back.
Yeah, the land pirates are killing them to take what they have.
Yeah. So what's their physical condition when you see them, their financial condition, all of that?
Yeah, so when I was in Lesbos...
So give me some stories.
I'll give you some stories. I know you're asking for that.
Yeah.
When I was in Lesbos running the 24-hour facility, we would have hordes of Pakistani men arriving into the refugee camps, and they would come... they'd walked a lot of the distance from Pakistan all the way to Lesbos. So, a lot of that distance is Turkey, mountainous terrain. They'd have frostbites, their feet, their toes. I've got pictures that you probably wouldn't want to put up on your screen. Children as well, actually. We had men, 60 of them, who would get put in one truck, and then they'd travel for 3-4 weeks at a time in that position, cramped position, and then come out, 3-4 weeks later. The only way they could keep themselves warm is by smoking inside the truck. It was too risky to let them out before that time was up, before they reached a certain destination. They'd lose a lot of muscle mass. And a lot of them would have scabies, infectious diseases. So they'd be spreading those amongst each other. We saw a lot of trafficked children from Pakistan.
Wow.
Okay, we need to accept these issues as a community. Our children are being trafficked within Pakistan and outside of Pakistan. A lot of our women are being trafficked into China. There are issues that we refuse to see because we're too focused, sadly, sometimes on other issues that the media is telling us to focus on. What's happening in Pakistan right now, I don't have any political affiliation with anybody. A lot of distractions are happening for Pakistan. The number of cases, pedophilia cases, child rape cases happening in Pakistan, kidnappings that are happening in Pakistan, women's rape, men being raped. These are difficult topics to talk about, because then all of a sudden we should not use certain language. It's vulgar. How else are we to address these problems? Because they're definitely not being discussed in mosques. Okay. Yeah. Before an imam tells me to wear a headscarf, I would really like to have a conversation with them about the pedophilia in Pakistan. These are very difficult topics.
I've lived there, and I can be witness to pedophilia is rampant in some areas. I've seen it with my own eyes. What happens to children? They give them money, they take them away. Sometimes it's forced. And it's something, again, it's taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it. In terms of like where we are right now with the whole refugee crisis, people that are in desperate need for help, what is it that the ordinary person can do to help? What can they do?
To not think of them as your enemy, to think of them as one of your own. That could have been you. You have won a postcode lottery. You and I could have been sat in Bakar Valley right now in one of those refugee camps, or we could have been in Balochistan somewhere dealing with the consequences of the floods 8 months on, 10 months on.
You know what I find really painful even to think about is stories where people who are so desperate out of poverty, they will send their child to Europe from, let's say, Africa, and they'll send it with a stranger, with a trafficker, and say, send my child out of this poverty to anywhere in Europe, to any place. I don't know where they're going to go. They'll just be able to eat something. So imagine giving your child away just so they can eat something, but you don't know if they're going to be abused, raped, murdered, made us into a slave or a maid. And that's the level of desperation that people don't see or understand.
A lot of these children I've worked with on the streets of Greece who are now selling themselves for sex in Athens, in parts of Thessaloniki, in the cities of Greece, because they couldn't move onwards. Europe paid Turkey to keep the refugees in 2016. These children couldn't actually pass certain borders. They were then living on the streets and they were selling themselves for sex on the streets at the age of 13 and 14. Imagine. A lot of them couldn't return to their own countries because they were so young, they didn't know their address. They didn't know how to get back to their very remote rural village.
They may even forget their family if they're that young. You know, sometimes you won't know who their family is or what your address was or names. It's very difficult. But social media doesn't talk about these things.
Why is that?
It's not flowery and pretty. It's not fun. It's not a prank. It's not a joke. It's not showing a Lamborghini. You know, these are difficult things and not interesting to people. You know, what's more interesting is entertainment.
They're interesting to some, Dr. Deen. They're interesting to many, actually.
But maybe in your feed, because you do this work, but I've never seen anyone talk about it. So it depends on what your feed is giving you based on what you're interested in.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize. I thought there was a bigger interest in what you're saying.
So if you go on some people's phones, it's just makeup tutorials. For others, it's just sports cars. For others, just sports. So your algorithm will feed you what you're looking at. So you see it maybe in your world with your contacts all doing this kind of great work. You maybe think everybody knows about it. But trust me, in my world, people aren't thinking of this.
So we're creating a narcissistic future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, narcissistic or ignorant, you know, if people knew about it, if influencers spoke about these things, you know, because this doesn't get you virality, it doesn't get you revenue on YouTube. So, I mean, who wants to do something that doesn't make you? It's not a makeup product, you know. It's even thought of as like this is all made up. Actually, you know, like there isn't that much suffering when there are millions of refugees. And like you said, they shouldn't actually have to leave their home country in the first place if things were good there. Who wants to leave? Nobody wants to leave.
When your and my parents left Pakistan, they came because there was not much there for them to give to us, right? So for the future of their children. When expats leave the UK to go live in Dubai, they're called expats. When people come from other countries into the UK, they're called migrants.
But that's the thing. It's all about terms. So I call people that are migrants expats here. Why shouldn't they be called expats then? Let's give them a fancy name. Why should they be called migrants? Call them expats.
I think you can take it back to the colonial years, can't you? I think that inferiority complex that we've had built into our psyche for years and years and years, it's going to take some time for us to really start owning our own identity.
Have you had any reaction to your work, like negative reaction from government, from agencies, from anyone trying to stop you do this work? Has that been an issue anywhere?
I get questioned a lot when I'm at the airport. Sometimes if I'm going to America, I'll get stopped because on my passport, the number of stamps I have for the Middle East. Generally, the comments are very positive. You're considered a hero figure because you're this hero who's going around with a rucksack trying to save people. I think that if I was to talk about it from a media's perspective, you don't get invited to interviews like these often because the focus needs to be somewhere else. The bigger charities who are bringing in a lot more money.
That's a very good point. Let's talk about that in detail because I've done some work with the homeless and that theme comes about quite a bit. So we will continue with this discussion after the break. This is Real Talk with Dr. Deen. Sargon, welcome back to Real Talk. So we were talking about people being real, building empathy with them. Now, where we are in the world today, we've got millions of people trying to get to Europe, trying to seek a better life or seek refuge. What, especially like in the UK, so let me give you a scenario. So I interviewed a lot of homeless people and I said, are you getting help on the street? So literally they had nothing. They had a sleeping bag. And I said, who is helping? He said, the big charities don't help us because they do whatever's good for marketing, but actual help, we don't get any help. And it seems like a lot of tick box exercises, a lot of bureaucracy, governance, paperwork, but grassroots work, I find even in youth work, a lot of the millions of pounds go to these large organizations who'd never spoken to a young person in their life on the street, but they'll do fancy reports and reporting back, all of that. So ticking all the boxes. What's it been like for you with like your work and the money that you need to do the work?
Yeah. These issues I've faced because I choose to work on a grassroots level, because I know the difference that makes. And a lot of my donors would work with me, come out to see the work that we're doing, support me physically there, but also, donations wise. Facebook has been a phenomenal tool for me. I created a very big network, and often people see the work you do and then they want to support the work you do. If you want to pay attention to detail, you can achieve a lot with little money. Yeah. And I think very early I realized that's how I wanted to work, because my work is all pro bono. And then I realized there were a lot more people who wanted to work that way with me. So my friends, my female friends from university, they helped me set up the very first charity. They continue to work for that charity pro bono again. I think there's definitely space that you can fill in the grassroots sector if you want to work. Whether you'd get the accolades, whether you'd get the awards, whether you'd get the knighthoods, probably not.
Yeah, that's a very good point. There's two types of people I find in the voluntary space. It's those that are looking for the MBs, the OBs, working on that. They actually got a roadmap to it, and they'll do anything to get there. And then those that actually just care about people and want to do youth work and refugee work and humanitarian work. And they're not interested in any of the unsung heroes. Yeah. But why bother? Just be a doctor, live your life, get a nice car, get a nice house, get married, have kids. And why are you doing this? Why do you even bother?
Contentment. There's a lot of contentment in what I do.
Have you seen Allah help you?
Hugely.
Give me some examples of how Allah's helped you in your work.
The donations that would arrive, the medications that would arrive. A group of Dutch women just turned up to build my very first 24-hour clinical facility, which was 24 foot, 12 foot, huge facility in a refugee camp in the Olive Grove. And honestly speaking, the volunteers who were helping me, the majority of them were not Muslim. Divine help comes in ways that you cannot consider. And I think we become very, very sort of territorial, and we think khairat, we think charity is a Muslim thing only. I'm sorry, but no. Some of the most giving people, some of the most charitable people, some of the most kindest souls are not Muslim.
I think sometimes we as Muslims think, maybe we got a chip on the shoulder. I think sometimes we think that Allah doesn't help non-Muslims or people. And anybody who does good, Allah helps them. If anybody wants to do good in this world, Allah, because we are all the children of Adam alayhi salam. Every human is. Michael Jackson, Hitler, anybody, everybody is a child of Adam and Eve, Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam. And when we think that other people are not as human as Muslims, this is going against the Quran,
I agree with you strongly.
Because it's Allah honored all human beings in the Quran.
The number of times I've heard that, why are you not helping Muslims only? Okay, why are you not in Pakistan only? You're Pakistani. Why are you not helping the Pathan community? You're Pathan only. Go build a hospital in your village. This sense of us against them, I think, is internalized. I think it's racism that we have. And I think we're not doing very well when it comes to integrating with the non-Muslims.
The irony is that when the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, when the verse was revealed about feeding the poor, the majority of people in Medina at the time were non-Muslim. Allah was saying, feed the non-Muslim.
Incredible.
but people don't know that.
Incredible.
We actually think, should I give any money to a non-Muslim?
I've had Muslims say that to me. They've said to me, well, where is your charity going? Are you serving Muslims only? Because we'll give you the money then. And that's okay if that's how they want to distribute their charity. That's their choice. For me personally, the amount of Islamic etiquette I've learned from non-Muslims in these settings, in refugee camps, I will never forget. It turned me upside down working in this sector. It put me on my head, and all my beliefs, my faith, everything just moved around. And I learned more Islam in these spaces than I did going to the mosque.
I'm going to be controversial in my own entrepreneurship journey. Unfortunately, when I hire like developers or editors that are not Muslim, and some that are like even more secular, I don't know why they're more principled. And I get these religious folk I hire, and they always let me down, or they make excuses, or they want more money at the end. It's not about religiosity as per se, but just our assumption that somebody is a certain way just because of the way they look,
right,
or what country they're from. It's really sad that we don't treat people with dignity. Not everybody does that. There's amazing Muslims out there who treat everybody well, but there are a lot of people that don't understand that we're all human and we're all the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, and I think you're absolutely right. There's so many inspiring people that are not Muslim.
Abdul Sattar Eid, again, look him up if you don't know him. He would go around collecting dead bodies that were not claimed with the ambulance services that he'd set up early. And the number of, when he would find a dead body, you know, in a mortuary somewhere that needed burial, that had not been claimed for days, he would, his organization would bury them or cremate them, depending on their religion. He would honor their religion also in death. If he knew through some paperwork or some something that would signal towards that person's religion. This is in Pakistan, where the minorities are oppressed, let's be honest. He would honor them in their death. If they needed to be cremated, he would cremate them.
Just, you know, what I think educating people is really important about different, you know, when you don't hear the voice of people. So when you get to hear people like refugees, the homeless, you get to hear ethnic minorities. It's so important to hear those voices, because ignorance is a big issue, isn't it? It's not necessarily that people are bad or they're evil. It's just they don't know any better. Like if you've never spoken to your neighbor who's English, you've never spoken to anybody, and you haven't sent food around, and you're not making, and it's a two-way thing. It's not just us, it's other people also don't make an effort with us because they see a job and think, oh, don't know what type of people they are, making assumptions. So I think breaking down those barriers is everyone's job, you know, to be fair. And I think we all need to make more effort to be more human. You know, and I think that's such a crucial.
For me, humanity is my religion, and I interpret Islam as humanitarianism.
Well, the thing is that, you know, in the world we live in today, we got, especially if you're on TikTok or social media, there are so many opinions. Everybody is like a lawyer, a social justice warrior for their movement, you know, and we all need guidance. And you know, I think it's very important that we have discussions, and I think hearing other viewpoints, even if I disagree or you disagree, hearing other people is so important. Otherwise, you can't understand where a person's coming from or what they're saying or why they say that. In this podcast series, I've met people that when I sat down, I thought maybe this is what they're like from reading them online. And when I interviewed them, they were completely different. And my own perception was wrong or different in my mind. And when I spoke to them, it was like, wow, I thought this person, from what I read or what I saw on their social media, they were very different. But when you actually speak to somebody, you learn so much about people that you never think that this person could be like this, or this person's amazing in this way. You don't even think about it until you actually you got to make the effort. And that goes back to, you got to speak to a refugee to know their story.
Do you think we're quite sheltered as a Muslim community?
Yeah. But it's not just a Muslim issue. You can go to the Chinese community in America. They're sheltered. I think it's a human thing. If you put different people in a room, it's not even a racism thing. You put different people in a room, you put Chinese people, white people, black people, brown, and you just say everybody mix. And it's very likely that they'll all just go to their own people. And it's not a prejudice thing. It's just a human thing.
It's a tribal thing.
It's a tribal thing. And they're comfortable with what they know. And then you'd have to encourage them.
Yeah.
Speak to that person. That's why sometimes in lectures, what we do, we tell students to sit with someone that they've never sat with.
Yeah.
Just to make them get to know somebody or ask questions that are different. And I think that's so important. And that also leads into the whole integrity of communities, respecting other people and also our identity. So how do we form an identity? I'm very interested in this area. So my PhD subject was in integration of minorities. And one of the interesting things you find is that some communities, they integrate over time, some segregate over time. But those that segregate, they have strengthened their culture or their beliefs and they haven't lost it. So it's a really difficult debate. You can either segregate and save your values, your faith, your culture, but then you're not going to integrate. And if you integrate, you can lose that, but then you become part of whatever maybe the mainstream culture is. It's a really difficult dilemma because a lot of people, whatever culture they may be, they don't want to lose it. Whatever it might be, it could be, American right-wing culture, in Alabama or something, or it could be Pakistani culture or Islamic Muslim values, whatever it might be. People are scared to lose that and not give it up, But just give us some advice from what you've learned in your whole journey. Top tips for the audience, please.
Be true to yourself. Honesty. Yeah. If something makes you uncomfortable, raise at least your voice against it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We've run out of time. Thank you for being our guest on Real